Welcome to Study Faith with AI, where we use the power of AI to help you explore the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I'm Meg Jensen.
And I'm Paul Carter.
And we're Google AIs. Whether you're a lifelong member or just starting to learn about the church, we're here to dive deep into its history, beliefs, and culture.
So if you're ready to learn, you're in the right place.
That's right.
Let's get started. Have you ever thought about how, those big personal decisions, like falling in love, can get really messy when your family has totally different ideas about things?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. The story of Joseph Smith Jr. and Emma Hale and all the drama with her family.
It's a good one. Lots of twists and turns, especially with Emma's parents.
To really get this story, we got to go back to the early 1800s. Picture the Susquehanna Valley in Pennsylvania. Beautiful, but life was hard, tied to the land.
Right, but Emma's family, the Hales, they were doing all right. They had a so-called middling mansion, not a log cabin, a step up. Her dad, Isaac Hale, was a pretty interesting guy, came from Vermont, originally from Connecticut. A hunter, independent, sharp, witty, and his family, very devout Christians.
And then comes Joseph Smith Jr., not a local. He shows up with Josiah Stoll's crew looking for a Spanish silver mine. You can already see the clash, right?
Total clash of worlds. You got Joseph mixed up in this unconventional, maybe even shady business, and then you have the Hales, settled, respected, religious.
And then there's Emma. Everyone says she was beautiful, smart, and had this kind of refinement her parents valued. She was a bit older than Joseph, by about a year and a half, but there was definitely a connection. He was smitten, no question.
That's where things get interesting. Why was Isaac Hale so dead set against Joseph? It wasn't just a little, I don't like him. It was huge, big enough to lead to a full-blown elopement.
A real scandal. So what are we trying to figure out today?
Well, we want to get to the bottom of Isaac's opposition. Was it just personality? Were there deeper reasons? And how did Joseph's actions later on confirm Isaac's suspicions? How did this all lead to Emma being separated from her family because of religion? And what does this tell us about Joseph Smith himself?
Right, because it's all about trying to understand Joseph Smith a little better.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've got some great sources. We've got Historical Society records all about the Hales, and we also found this fantastic YouTube transcript of a historian, Dan Vogel, talking about Joseph Smith's trial in 1826.
Ah, the 1826 trial. Interesting.
It's really fascinating. It might give us some clues.
Well, let's start with Isaac's early concerns about Joseph. It seems like 1825 is a key year. That's when Josiah Stoll, this farmer and businessman from New York, hires Joseph Smith Jr. and his father to hunt for that supposed silver mine.
Right, and here's something that's really interesting. Isaac Hale actually lets Joseph Jr. live with them because of his connection with Stoll. Seems like the whole Stoll crew was probably staying in the Hales' old log home, the one they still had on their property, even though, they had a much nicer frame house by then.
Wow, so Isaac's seeing Joseph pretty much every day.
Yeah.
And what he sees, well, it worries him. His main concerns, it seems, were about Joseph's reputation and this whole treasure-digging thing. There was kind of a money-digging craze going on back then. Maybe Isaac himself was curious about it, or maybe he saw a way to make a little money by renting out his old log home to these groups.
Yeah, it's possible.
But over time, he becomes very skeptical of the whole business. How would someone like Isaac, who had worked hard to gain respect, view these treasure seekers?
Yeah, you got to wonder about the kind of people involved in that.
Not exactly the most upstanding citizens, maybe.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the 1826 trial that Dan Vogel talks about.
Yeah.
Our other source doesn't give us all the details, but the fact that Joseph was in legal trouble, that would have gotten back to Isaac.
Oh, absolutely.
Any whiff of legal problems would have confirmed everything Isaac was worried about. It wouldn't exactly scream, this is the perfect guy for my daughter. Especially when you consider Emma. Intelligent and refined, maybe even educated at a female seminary, like some folks say. Isaac probably wanted her to marry someone who was her equal, someone with prospects. And Joseph, at this point, treasure hunting and in legal trouble, he doesn't exactly fit the bill.
Not even close. And with Isaac digging in his heels, refusing to give his blessing, well, that led to the elopement. Joseph himself said later that Emma's father would not suffer us to be married at his house. That's a pretty strong statement.
It is. So they had to take her elsewhere to get married, as Joseph put it. Not exactly a quiet little disagreement, right? It was basically saying, we don't care what you think. Going against her parents' wishes, defining the social norms of the time.
It was a huge deal back then. Parental consent was everything.
So it really shows how determined they were to be together.
Or maybe it shows they were impulsive. I mean, who knows? But what happened next didn't help matters. After the marriage, Joseph keeps on treasure hunting. From Isaac's perspective, this just proves he was right all along.
Right, Joseph's not changing his ways, not becoming more responsive.
Not settling down. And then comes a major turning point. This is big. Joseph starts talking about finding gold plates and a whole new religion. Think about Isaac Hale, a devout Christian, hearing this.
What would he have thought?
It must have been shocking, confusing. We got to remember, this is the early 1800s, a time of religious revival, what they called the Second Great Awakening. Lots of religious excitement, new ideas floating around, but even then, claims of angels and golden scriptures would have been met with a lot of skepticism, especially from folks in established churches, like the Hales. Remember, they had connections to Congregationalists, Quakers, Methodists.
Not exactly open to new revelations.
Right. And then add to that all the local stories about divining rods and treasure seeking. Even Emma's uncle, Nathaniel Lewis, he'd seen divining rods used in Vermont. He was really critical of those spectacles Joseph used for translating. Isaac probably saw it all as a sign of delusion, maybe even lying.
So this religious difference, it became a massive rift in the family. It really separated Emma from her parents and her siblings. They just couldn't see eye to eye on this. And it wasn't just a difference in, like, theological ideas. The source tells us that Isaac Hale really opposed Joseph's teachings later in life. On his deathbed, he told his family, and again I'm quoting here, "You must not believe in Joe Smith or any false doctrines, but believe in the Holy Bible." It's pretty powerful and clear condemnation.
Yeah, and while it's true that Joseph and Emma did live with the Hales for a bit after they got married, while Joseph was working on the Book of Mormon translation, it didn't really heal the divide. Those core beliefs were just too different.
It's pretty touching to see that after Isaac passed away, Emma reached out to her mother and siblings. She wanted them to know her children, so she listed all their names and even invited them to Nauvoo, the city her religious community was building. And she made it clear it didn't matter if they accepted her religion.
That's really interesting. She wanted to maintain that connection despite everything.
She did. But although some of Emma's siblings ended up moving closer to Nauvoo so they could visit, her mother, Elizabeth, was too sick to travel. So even though Emma tried, she was still separated from her childhood home, her family's religious traditions.
A sad ending. It really highlights how these beliefs can separate people.
It does. So looking back at all this, the passionate romance, the conflict with her parents, what does it tell us about Joseph Smith? It's complicated, right?
Definitely. On the one hand, we've got Isaac Hale's view of Joseph. Not good. In his later affidavit, which we don't have here today, but it's pretty clear from other sources, he really distrusted Joseph, thought he was a bad influence, dishonest.
Right, he's the villain in Isaac's story.
Exactly. But then you have Joseph's own version of events. He mentions at one point that Isaac Hale even acted under divine providence in his defense.
Divine providence. Now that's interesting.
It could mean their early relationship was actually more complicated than we think. Or maybe it's just Joseph's way of understanding things, trying to make sense of the conflict.
Putting a positive spin on it.
Possibly. But what's really striking is how different Joseph's ambitions were from what Isaac Hale considered normal. Here's Joseph, chasing treasure, claiming divine revelations, starting a new religion. Isaac, a more traditional guy, probably saw this as reckless, maybe even deceptive.
He's disrupting the social order.
He is. And yet, despite all the opposition from her family, Emma is deeply drawn to Joseph. She sees something in him that says a lot about his charisma, his power to persuade, the strength of his belief. It was strong enough to convince her to leave everything behind, to go against her family, to build a new life with him.
It's a powerful story.
It is. What we're seeing here is a clash of completely different ways of thinking, different social expectations, deeply held beliefs that collide. Our sources offer different perspectives, and it's really up to you, the listener, to decide what you think about Joseph Smith based on all this.
Absolutely. So to sum up what we've learned today, Isaac Hale opposed Joseph because he didn't trust him. He thought he was shady, especially with all that treasure hunting. And then there were those legal issues. That led to the elopement, a huge slap in the face to her parents, Joseph's continuing to dig for treasure, and then the big one, the gold plates and the new religion. Those just reinforced Isaac's doubts. And sadly, it caused this huge religious division in the family that separated Emma from her parents and siblings.
And when we ask what kind of person was Joseph Smith, We see someone who was absolutely sure of himself, a leader, someone who challenged the way things were, even when everyone was against him. He had a huge impact on people, especially Emma, but he also caused a lot of pain and conflict, especially with his in-laws. It's a really complex picture.
It is. This deep dive really shows how personal stories and big historical events are all tangled up. It wasn't just about theology and grand ideas, it was also about relationships, different values, tough choices people made for love and belief.
Exactly. So here's something to think about. What happens when your beliefs and your loyalty to your family are pulling you in opposite directions? What are the lasting effects when love and your own convictions clash with what your parents want and what society expects? Could all this have played out differently back then, considering the culture and religious climate of the time? It makes you wonder how these early relationships and conflicts shaped the course of history.
It really does. It's a fascinating story with so many layers.
Yeah, it makes you think.
It does. Yeah. And it reminds us that history is full of these personal dramas, these clashes of wills that had huge consequences. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
If you find value in this exploration, please like, share, follow, and consider becoming a subscriber. Your contributions help keep these conversations going and allows us to maintain the highest quality production. You can find all the details at studyfaithwithai.com. Thank you for being part of this journey.